Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about organizing data and how to graph it. When you are looking at science, you're looking at a lot of data, no matter what kind of science you're talking about. So it's really important that you're able to not only organize the data into a table, but that you're able to also organize that into a graph, so it's a representation of the data you collected. And then also that you can look at somebody else's graph and interpret that. That is going to be all over the end of course exam. So we're going to spend some time working on it today, and then you guys, we're going to be talking about this all year long. Today, when you are doing this podcast, I'm going to give you some questions. What I want you to do is answer the questions in your notebooks. So as I ask you the question, you can just pause the video, answer it in your notebooks, and then click play to resume. There's also some graphs. I gave you a handout to go along with this podcast this time. So there are some blank spaces and grids for some graphs and data tables that I'm going to ask you to make. We will go over these in class on the due date assigned, and then I'll ask you some analysis questions to go along with it. All right? So here we go. Whenever data is collected, it often presents in a meaningful way so that you can view it quickly and quickly interpret what that means, all right? So a lot of times, especially in scientific articles or journals, you'll see information presented in a data table or a graph. This also might be true of some newspapers or magazine articles too. So data tables are one way of organizing the information. And then graphs are a picture diagram. So it's a picture of how to represent that numerical or quantitative data. So I want you to take a look at this graph, and we're going to be talking about a few, I'm going to be asking you a few different questions that go along with this, all right? If you pay attention here along the bottom, it talks about the amount of fertilizer, and it's in milligrams per liter, so that's the unit that the fertilizer is measured in. If you look at the vertical axis, it talks about the average plant height, and that unit is in centimeters. And then there are three different lines, and those lines are each labeled. So one of them is a corn plant, one is an oak seedling, and one of them is a rose bush. So just looking at this graph, what information do you feel like is being shown in this graph? Now, here's one example of what I was talking about. Go ahead and pause this, jot down the answer to this question. This would be number 1. And then when you're done, you can hit play to resume. All right, number 2, describe the results shown for the corn plants. What do you see happening in this graph just for the corn plants? Question number 3, describe results shown for the rose bushes. Okay, so a little more specific now. At what fertilizer concentration do the oak seedlings stop improving? What was the height of the tallest plant used in this experiment? For which plant is the fertilizer least effective at higher concentrations? The next one, which plant shows the best growth with the fertilizer concentration at 100 milligrams per liter? Predict how tall corn plants might be when the fertilizer concentration is 75 milligrams per liter. This is a little bit beyond interpreting. So this is going to be making some kind of prediction, which often you're going to have to do when you're talking about science. So consider the 3 types of plant used in this experiment. What reasons might explain why the results turned out as they did? And there could be any possible number of questions. So it's just your best guess. So go ahead and jot that down, and then go ahead and hit play when you're done. All right, now we are looking at a bar graph. And just so you know, Bar graphs are often used, line graphs are used to show growth over time or change over time or change at different components of the experiment. Like in the last one, we were looking at how things changed at different measurements of that fertilizer. Bar graphs instead are used to compare groups, okay? So before we were looking at change of different plant types over degrees of fertilizer. Now in this bar graph, we're looking at the difference of fish grown in pond water versus fish grown in tap water. So that's what I mean when we're looking at comparisons, okay? So looking at this, if you look at the bottom, the vertical axis that goes this way, it's talking about the different types of pond water. And if you look at the vertical axis this way, that goes up and down, that's called the y-axis. It's talking about average fish weight in grams, okay? And then there's a key up here, right up at the top. So question number 1, go ahead and answer this in your notebooks, just like you did for the last graph. Do fish grow to a larger weight in pond water or in tap water? And then number 2, which grows larger, males or females? Still using the same bar graph. Number 3, what is the average weight of male fish when grown in tap water? And question 4, why do you suppose the fish grow the best in pond water? That's another extrapolation kind of question. There's no one right answer. So go ahead and answer that the best of your ability, and then we will continue. Okay, so now let's talk about how you actually make a data table. When scientists collect data, you have to organize it in some kind of fashion, okay? You can't just randomly write numbers down, because when you go back to look at it, you probably won't know what that means, and definitely nobody else would know what that means. So when you collect data in science, it is going to be represented in some kind of data table. And if you look up here, there are headings at the top. There are a bunch of rows that go along this way, and then these are called the columns, okay? So the data table must have a title, and this one actually is missing a title, this example that you're seeing right now. There's rows and columns within that data table, and then there's heads, and the heads are just the labels for each of the columns, so that's what's shown right here. The title should be placed at the top, and it's going to be an overall description that talks about the information that's contained in the table, so somebody can look at it pretty quickly and figure out exactly what you're talking about. At the top of each column is going to be the head, and that just tells you the specific information that's located in each column, okay? So I want you to make a data table from the following information. So the following data was collected for the growth of a plant. I went ahead and labeled this graph for you. What I need you to do is you're going to place the column heads, and then you're going to fill the data in for the growth of the plant. So on day 0, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and day 5. So go ahead and do that. Hit pause on the video, and when you're done with your graph, this is on the information sheet that I gave you, you can hit play again. All right, so here's one that's a little more complicated. You have another data table that's underneath it, and that's labeled data table 2. I want you to fill out this information. This is regarding the number of cricket chirps recorded on 2 different nights at different temperatures, so it's a little more intricate. You have a group here that's night 1, and a group here that is talking about night 2 that the data was obtained. So go ahead and hit pause, fill that out, and resume when you're done. All right, so now that we've covered how to make a data table, we are going to talk about how to make a line graph. Before a line graph can be constructed, you have to identify the 2 variables. So you have to identify the independent variable and the dependent variable, and we've already practiced that. So if you're pretty good at that, you should be pretty good at determining which goes where. The independent variable goes on the horizontal axis right here. Okay, that's the x-axis. The dependent variable goes on the y-axis. The line graph is going to show data plotted as points that are connected by a line. They're used to show change over time and used to compare different sets of data. All right, so now it's your turn to make a line graph. We're going to practice 2 times. So the first time, using the grid provided, make a line from the information on data table 1, and that was the plant growth data table that you just made. So your instructions are, first determine which variable to place on the horizontal, the x-axis that goes along the bottom, and which variable to place on the vertical y-axis that goes on the side. Make sure you label each axis. Scale them, which means you're going to write the numbers. Make sure you start at 0 and then make your way. And you want to use the whole graph. You don't just want to use one little piece of it, okay? You're going to write a title at the top, and then you are going to plot the points. So go ahead and pause this, go back to data table 1 that's on the information sheet, and create your graph. All right. Now we're going to do the same thing, but I want you to do this for data table 2. So go ahead, do the same type of thing. You're going to follow the same steps, and you're going to use data table 2 from your information sheet that you already filled in, and you're going to create this graph. So go ahead and hit pause, make the graph, and then hit play when you're done. All right. So now we're going to talk about a bar graph, how you make a bar graph. We read one, now I want you to make one. If you notice up here, it says bar graphs are useful for showing comparisons of data collected by counting. All right, so a lot of times you're going to talk about, you're still talking about the quantity of things, but you're looking at comparisons. So in this graph, it's talking about comparisons over different years, and it's comparing DELs versus HPQs, okay? Bar graphs also have 2 axes, horizontal and vertical. The horizontal axis down here is labeled, the vertical axis is divided. The data are not related, so the bars are not touching, which means they're not making a congruous line like a line graph does, okay? So the comparison bars can touch, but generally there's kind of a gap in between so that you can see that there's a difference between the data collected for the independent variable. Okay, so now you're going to make a bar graph of the following information, and you're going to follow the same steps as you did on the line graph. You're still going to create a title. You are going to label the axes, the independent and dependent variable. You are going to scale it, so you're going to write the numbers to show how much growth there is, or the time that the data was collected over. Instead of drawing, you're going to plot your data, but instead of this time drawing lines to connect it, you are going to draw bars up, and you're going to shade them in. Make sure that you make a key if you're comparing different types of data for every, like in this sense, we're talking about years and kilograms, but we're only looking at one thing. If you were doing 2, you would need to make sure that you made a key because you're comparing 2 different things and you want to make a distinction. Okay, so in this one, you're looking at kilograms of peaches collected in an orchard in a 6-year period of time. Here's the data right here. So I want you to go ahead and set up this graph, hit pause, and when you're finished, hit resume. Okay, now we're looking at circle graphs. Circle graphs, you're not going to see a lot of circle graphs, or pie charts is another name that they're called. You're not going to see a lot of those when we're talking about scientific data. Sometimes you will see them, but they're most often going to be seen in newspapers and magazines. And that is a really convenient way to show the relative size of parts, but no matter what, the data always has to make up 100%. okay, because you're dividing that whole circle into different parts. So in this example that's shown here, we're talking about U.S. average indoor water use. So there is still a title, but instead of there being different axes, this circle is divided into sections, and then each section has its own label, and it identifies a number that that section represents, and then the actual information that that section represents. So I want you to make your own circle graph or pie chart. Suppose that in a particular high school, the number of students taking a science class is as follows. 50% are taking biology, of course, because biology is the best. 30% are taking chemistry, 10% are taking physics, and 10% are taking some other random type of science class because they don't know any better. So I want you to use the circle graph, or the circle that I provided to you, to represent that data in pictorial form. Go ahead and hit pause, fill out your data, and then resume when you're done. This is the end of the video. We covered a lot of information in this short amount of time. We talked about how to interpret data charts, how to interpret graphs, how to create data charts, and then using that data to create either line graphs or bar graphs. And then we even talked about circle graphs. That's a lot of information. So please come to class with questions because I'm sure that you have some. I also hope that you come to class with all of your practice charts and graphs filled out so we can look at them and compare them. And then we're going to go over some analysis questions next time I see you and just make sure that we've really got this down. All right, this is going to be part of your Standard 1 test. So the more we practice, the better we'll get. I will see you soon.